мая 23 года.
Зеленский, когда стал президентом, был готов к любым договоренностям.
Шойгу! Герасимов! Где боеприпасы?
It was June 24, 2023. Russia witnessed a rebellion, a revolt against its top brass, against President Vladimir Putin himself. This story has all the markings of a Hollywood movie: drama, betrayal, and some good old twists. A strongman leader versus his trusted aide. A private army marching on. People cheering the rebellion. Deals being brokered behind the scenes. And a revolt that ended as soon as it began. The mutiny may have ended in 36 hours. The rebel may have been banished. But is this truly the end? Or the beginning of something new? Will this be a turning point for Russia and for Putin? It all began on a Friday. Prigozhin released this video. It was 30 minutes long. At first glance, it looked like any other Wagner rant. Prigozhin has criticized the Russian military before multiple times. But this time, the Wagner chief sounded very angry. He questioned the Kremlin's operations. He said the Ukraine war was based on lies.
The war was not needed in order to return the Russian citizens to our bosom, and not in order to demilitarize and denazify Ukraine. It was needed for one star with additional embroidery so that one mentally sick man could look good on a coffin pillow.
The Kremlin was obviously stunned, but they soon scrambled into action. They called for his immediate arrest. That's where things start escalating. Prigozhin said his fighters were approaching Rostov-on-Don, so Moscow sent troops there. But the Wagner Forces still took the city. They faced no resistance. So this time, the Wagner Forces aimed higher. This time, they wanted to take the capital.
This is not a military coup. It is a march for justice. Our actions do not in any way interfere with troops.
A private army was marching towards Moscow. Obviously, Kremlin was rattled. This was their seat of power, so they tried some damage control. Russian President Vladimir Putin addressed the nation.
We won't let it repeat a civil war. We will protect our people and our statehood from any threats, including treason from the inside. What we are facing now is treason. Unreasonable ambitions and personal interests lead to treachery, state treason, and betrayal of own people, and the common cause which Wagner fighters and commanders fought for along and died for alongside with other units and brigades.
But even this failed to stop Wagner. By Saturday evening, they were just 200 kilometers away from Moscow. That's when the unexpected happened. Prigozhin called off the mutiny. Why? Because a deal had been brokered. It was led by Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko. Prigozhin promised to leave to Belarus, and the Wagner forces were back to their bases. Basically, rebellion abandoned. But why did Prigozhin attempt it in the first place? Why did Putin's so-called chef rebel against him? To understand why Prigozhin did this, we need to look at his life. Yevgeny Prigozhin was born in Leningrad, now known as St. Petersburg. This was in the year 1961. Incidentally, this was where Putin was born too. He came from a modest background. His father had died when he was young. His mother worked in the hospital. Prigozhin started at a sporting academy, but he did not make it as an athlete. His childhood was tumultuous, to say the least. So soon, young Prigozhin found himself on the wrong side of the law, On March 1980, he robbed a woman on the streets. It was one of the many robberies Prigozhin and his friends carried out. Soon, he was sentenced for prison. This was for 9 years. Prigozhin was convicted of theft and fraud. His future looked bleak, but things took a turn. With the fall of the Soviet Union, Prigozhin was out of jail. He was looking at ways to earn money, so he turned to food. He became a hot dog seller in Leningrad. It soon grew into a successful fast food company, but Prigozhin was aiming higher than street food. He knew the right people, and with great power comes greater influence. Soon, he caught the attention of Vladimir Putin. Putin first admired his restaurant in St. Petersburg. In New Ireland, Prigozhin had a boat that he turned into a floating restaurant. Soon, Putin started taking foreign dignitaries there. There's a famous picture of Prigozhin's from 2011. It shows him bending down over a seated Putin, offering him a dish. The Russian president looks impressed. So that was the start of their relationship. A relationship that would only keep growing. Soon, Prigozhin began to cater for government events. It was through his company, Concord. The next obvious step was serving the Kremlin. Prigozhin got that too. By 2015, his companies won major contracts worth $1 billion. Prigozhin was now serving the army. Prigozhin was a chef and a businessman. So what explains an alternate career as a ruthless military commander? How did a chef lead one of the biggest private armies in the world? It started in 2014, the year Russia invaded Crimea. Putin denied Russian troops were involved. But they had to make the deniability plausible. Enter private armies. They were illegal in Russia, but it hasn't stopped the Kremlin. These armies coordinated actions with the defense ministry. Prigozhin's Wagner was the most prominent of them. It turned into Prigozhin's pet project. He pushed hard for it, and Putin listened. After all, Prigozhin was now in his inner circle.
He sees himself as a classic Russian hard nut. He became a close favorite of President Putin, famously running the catering for some of his more major events. And in establishing and overseeing and deploying the Wagner Group, he has done things around the world which the Russian regime didn't want to use the Russian military for because it wasn't deniable and they might be held accountable.
A key moment for the Wagner Group came in 2015. Putin decided to help Bashar al-Assad in the Syrian war. Prigozhin won contracts for food and supplies. So his Wagner forces were dispatched. There, they fought the rebels, they suffered some losses, but more importantly, they made a mark. Wagner was now a formidable force, doing Moscow's bidding across the globe. Soon, their operations expanded. Wagner forces were everywhere. Syria, Mali, Central African Republic, basically, they have a strong presence in West Asia and Africa. They do Moscow's bidding here to keep a grip on troubled regions and also counter Western influence. Before the Ukraine war, Wagner was believed to have 5,000 members. Last week, Prigozhin said he commanded 25,000 troops. So how did they make money? Russia pays Wagner troops to fight. Putin admitted that himself.
Meanwhile, I want you all to also know about this. Support for the entire Wagner Group was fully provided by the state, from the defense ministry, from the state budget. We fully funded this group. From May 2022 to May 2023 alone, the state paid Wagner 86.262 billion rubles, or $1 billion for maintenance and incentive payments.
So Wagner Forces is a private army. It was funded by the Russian state. But what now? Its chief has been banished to Belarus. Some of the forces are also in Belarus. What will happen to Wagner's operations?
That's an interesting question, and this is a reason why I think that Putin might not try to get rid of Prigozhin straight away, because those loose ends need to be tied up, and somebody will have to assume command of his troops in Africa. So the part of the troops that are in Russia, they might be sent to Ukraine again, and those who are in Africa and Syria will need a leader. And the problem would be to find a credible leader, somebody to replace Prigozhin, and somebody to whom these people will listen. This is why killing Prigozhin straight away wouldn't have favored Putin in the long term, because of other operations in other locations. So maybe just for those purposes, Prigozhin will be kept so that he can control the troops until a better alternative comes up.
But where does this leave Putin? Prigozhin was once his trusted aide, a part of his inner circle. He was somewhat of a Frankenstein's monster, a monster Putin created, one that ended up challenging him. Prigozhin may not have the manpower to take him down, but this was a serious challenge, the only challenge to his leadership in 24 years. So what will he do? Will he ever let this go?
One of the real imponderables throughout this has been how much Putin actually knows, and the extent to which he recognizes that unleashing Prigozhin and allowing him to become this loose cannon, this wild card, is actually a threat to his own position. Now, we've been hearing throughout much of the war in Ukraine and before that Putin is actually isolated from sources of objective information. And that would seem to be borne out by his behavior throughout this Prigozhin saga, because Prigozhin and Wagner have become more and more unhinged in the attacks that they have been mounting against the Ministry of Defense. And for a long time, those who were watching him were wondering how it was that he was being allowed to persist, and expecting that there would come a reckoning, there would come a crisis between them and the Ministry of Defense. That has now come, and President Putin has not come forward with a coherent plan for dealing with it as far as we can see at the moment.
So did Putin let it go too far? Will this hamper his strongman image? Well, the revolt has raised many questions. It exposed cracks in the regime and challenged Putin's leadership. It may not collapse soon, but it is definitely wounded. Putin has a lot more to answer for in the weeks and months ahead. But revenge or no revenge, he is unlikely to forget this anytime soon. Military rebellions are often a harbinger, even the unsuccessful ones. So this is not the end of the story. It is merely the beginning.